Black woman ignored in first class. Moments later, everyone realizes she's the airline's new CEO. Imagine stepping into a world where you're judged the moment you walk through the door. Not for who you are, but for who people assume you aren't. A black woman in first class, overlooked and ignored, yet she holds a secret that will turn this flight, and their judgments, upside down. What happens when the person they dismiss turns out to be the one holding all the power? Stay tuned, because this story is about to take off in ways no one saw coming. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy heartwarming stories of courage and justice, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support means the world and helps us reach even more people with these powerful stories. Now, let's jump right in. Amara King stepped out of the sleek black car, her heels clicking softly against the curb as the airport valet hurried to assist with her luggage. The terminal buzzed with activity, travelers rushing past her in a chaotic dance of haste and exhaustion. She adjusted her cashmere scarf, shielding herself from the cool morning breeze, and made her way into the grand terminal reserved for first-class passengers. The gleaming floors and ambient lighting were designed to exude luxury, yet Amara could feel the weight of every judgmental glance that lingered on her. Dressed in a tailored navy suit and carrying a leather tote, she looked every bit the part of an accomplished professional, but the silent assumptions in their eyes betrayed their biases. A woman like her, a black woman, wasn't the image most people associated with first-class travel. She approached the priority check-in counter, where a sharply dressed attendant greeted her with a tight smile that barely reached her eyes. "Good morning. Economy check-in is over there," the attendant said, gesturing dismissively without bothering to check her ticket. Amara's lips twitched into a polite smile. "I'm flying first class," she said evenly, sliding her boarding pass across the counter. The attendant hesitated, her expression faltering as she glanced at the ticket. Her cheeks flushed, and she plastered on a forced smile. "Ah, my apologies, Miss King. Let me take care of that for you." "Thank you," Amara replied, her tone calm but firm. She had no intention of making a scene, not yet at least. She had learned long ago to pick her battles carefully, to observe and take mental notes before deciding when and how to act. Once her luggage was checked in, Amara moved through security and into the exclusive lounge for first-class passengers. The room was a study in opulence, with plush leather seats, crystal chandeliers, and an expansive buffet spread. Yet, as she walked in, she felt the subtle shift in atmosphere. Conversations hushed and eyes turned toward her, scanning her as if trying to place her. Was she a celebrity? A last-minute upgrade? Someone who didn't belong? Amara ignored the stares, her strides confident and unhurried as she found a quiet corner to sit. She retrieved a book from her tote, flipping it open to a marked page, though her eyes barely registered the words. Instead, she observed. She saw the way the lounge attendants fawned over other passengers, their voices saccharine and eager, while their smiles for her were fleeting and strained. An announcement signaled the boarding for her flight. Amara closed her book, gathered her belongings, and headed to the gate. As she approached the line for first-class boarding, she could feel the tension ripple through the queue. The gate agent's smile faltered when she scanned Amara's boarding pass, but she recovered quickly, waving her through with a perfunctory, "Enjoy your flight." The first-class cabin was a cocoon of luxury. Each seat was a private suite, with fully reclining chairs and personalized service promised at every turn. Amara took her time stowing her tote in the overhead compartment, noting the sharp glances from a middle-aged man seated nearby. He shifted uncomfortably, his lips pressing into a thin line as if her presence disturbed the sanctity of his space. Before Amara could settle into her seat, a flight attendant in a crisp uniform approached her. Her name tag read Lauren, and her smile was tight, her gaze flickering with a mixture of disdain and condescension. "Excuse me, ma'am," Lauren began, her voice overly sweet but laced with an edge. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Amara's expression remained serene as she handed over her boarding pass. "I'm quite sure," Lauren's eyes scanned the pass, her brows knitting briefly before smoothing out. "Of course, my mistake," she said, handing it back. But the stiffness in her smile betrayed her thoughts. Amara settled into her seat, her movements composed. She could feel Lauren's eyes on her as she moved on to assist other passengers. The whispers began almost immediately. The businessman seated across from her leaned toward his companion, muttering something that made them both chuckle under their breath. Amara caught fragments of their conversation. "Probably upgraded. Can you imagine?" She sighed inwardly but kept her gaze fixed ahead, her hands resting lightly on the armrests. Years of navigating these situations had taught her patience, though the sting of prejudice never fully dulled. For now, she would wait and watch. The flight was long, and the truth always had a way of surfacing. Amara settled into her seat, smoothing her skirt as the muted hum of boarding announcements filled the cabin. The wide leather seat cradled her in comfort, but the tension radiating from the surrounding passengers made it hard to fully relax. She caught the quick glances darting her way, sharp and scrutinizing, as if her very presence were an anomaly, a disruption in their carefully curated bubble of exclusivity. A flight attendant with sleek blonde hair and a tight professional smile bustled through the aisle. Her name tag read Lauren, and her crisp uniform bore the airline's logo embroidered in gold. Lauren seemed to glide effortlessly, offering warm smiles and attentive service to every passenger she encountered. But when her gaze landed on Amara, the smile wavered, almost imperceptibly before vanishing entirely. Amara leaned back, adjusting her seatbelt. She had noticed this subtle shift before, on countless occasions, in countless spaces. It was the kind of look that suggested she was an outsider, someone who had stumbled into a place where she didn't belong. She inhaled slowly, her polished composure concealing the quiet storm within her. Lauren approached the seat diagonally across from Amara, crouching slightly to engage in conversation with a man in a tailored suit. His laughter rang out, rich and self-assured, as Lauren offered him a drink menu. "Would you care for a glass of champagne before takeoff, Mr. Davenport?" she asked, her voice syrupy with charm. Davenport gave a curt nod. "Only if it's the good stuff, Lauren." "Of course," she replied with a conspiratorial smile. Amara waited patiently. She didn't need champagne, but it was protocol for first-class passengers to be offered a pre-flight beverage. Lauren turned to leave without acknowledging her. "Excuse me," Amara said, her tone polite but firm. "Could I also see a drink menu, please?" Lauren paused mid-step, her body stiffening almost imperceptibly. She turned slowly, her smile now forced and brittle. "Oh, sure. One moment," she said, the words clipped. Amara nodded, watching as Lauren walked away, only to return moments later with the drink menu. She handed it to Amara without a word, her fingers brushing the edges of the pages as though reluctant to part with them. "Thank you," Amara said evenly, maintaining eye contact. Lauren offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes and quickly moved on. The interactions continued in this vein, small slights wrapped in civility. When another flight attendant arrived to take orders, Lauren intercepted her, whispering something as they both glanced in Amara's direction. Amara caught snippets, words like mistake and double check. The second attendant hesitated, her gaze flickering between Lauren and Amara, before walking away without addressing Amara at all. A sinking feeling settled in Amara's chest, but she refused to let it show. Years of navigating spaces like this had taught her the importance of poise. She straightened her back and fixed her gaze on the view outside the window. The runway stretched into the distance, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. It was a fleeting reminder of beauty in a world that often seemed determined to challenge her worth. The tension in the cabin thickened when another passenger, seated one row ahead, turned to look at her. He was older, with silver hair and a pair of glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. His expression was a mixture of curiosity and condescension. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his tone loud enough to draw attention from nearby passengers. "Are you sure you're in the right seat? First class can be a bit tricky sometimes." Amara met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, I'm sure," she replied, her voice calm but with an edge of steel. The man blinked, seemingly taken aback by her confidence. Lauren, who had been passing by, stopped and placed a hand on the man's arm. "It's fine, Mr. Harris," she said, her voice low and soothing. "I'll double-check her ticket." Amara's hands tightened around the armrests, her nails digging into the soft leather. She had presented her boarding pass at the gate, the same as everyone else. The insinuation that she had somehow blundered her way into first class was both insulting and infuriating. But she remained silent, letting Lauren fumble through her thinly veiled attempts to assert dominance. The faintest flicker of unease crossed Lauren's face before she quickly masked it. "If there's anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable, let me know," she said, the words hollow. Amara didn't reply. She simply leaned back in her seat, her calm demeanor masking the quiet power she held. She knew this flight was just the beginning of a story these people would never forget. The hum of the engines vibrated faintly through the cabin as the plane reached cruising altitude. Amara adjusted her seat slightly, watching as Lauren returned with a tray of sparkling champagne flutes. The golden bubbles danced in the glass, a silent celebration for everyone except her. Lauren moved with precision, offering the drinks one by one, her rehearsed smile firmly in place. As she reached Amara's row, there was a noticeable pause. Lauren hesitated, her hand hovering over the tray as if debating whether to offer Amara a glass. "Would you like one?" she asked abruptly, the question devoid of the warmth she had shown the other passengers. Amara studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. "No, thank you," she said, her voice smooth and composed. Lauren exhaled, almost imperceptibly, as if relieved to be spared the effort. She moved on, leaving Amara to sit in silence. But silence, Amara knew, often spoke volumes. She felt the unspoken judgments swirling around her, as palpable as the air in the cabin. As the plane began its taxi to the runway, Amara watched the first-class crew continue their rounds, their smiles warm and welcoming for everyone but her. When Lauren passed by her seat again, Amara decided she had observed enough. She leaned slightly forward, her voice steady and deliberate. "Excuse me, Lauren," she said. Lauren turned, her expression caught between feigned politeness and irritation. "Yes? Is there a reason I've been receiving different treatment from the rest of the passengers?" Lauren blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean," she said, her voice rising slightly as other passengers turned to watch. Amara's lips curved into a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I think you do, but don't worry. I'll make sure to address it later." Across the aisle, Mr. Davenport, the suited businessman, chuckled loudly, drawing attention to himself as he gestured toward Amara. "First time flying first class?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Amara turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze with calm precision. "No," she replied. "Is it yours?" His smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Of course not," he said, laughing as if she had made a joke. "Just thought you looked a bit out of place." The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. A few other passengers exchanged glances, their smirks barely concealed. Amara felt the weight of their collective judgment pressing down on her, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she allowed the moment to stretch, letting Davenport's words echo in the uncomfortable silence. Finally, she leaned forward slightly, her voice quiet but firm. "And what exactly does out of place look like to you?" Davenport's face reddened slightly, his confidence shaken by the directness of her question. "I didn't mean anything by it," he muttered, turning back to his drink. Amara leaned back in her seat, her expression impassive. She could feel the tension simmering around her, an undercurrent of hostility that refused to be ignored. But she also knew how to navigate these waters. Years of experience had taught her that silence could be as powerful as words. Lauren returned, this time with a meal service. She placed plates in front of each passenger with practiced efficiency, her smile unwavering. When she reached Amara, however, she hesitated once more. "Unfortunately, we've run out of the filet mignon," Lauren said, her tone almost apologetic but laced with something else, a subtle satisfaction. Would you like the chicken or the vegetarian option? Amara raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a faint smile. I find it hard to believe you've run out of the filet, she said, her voice soft but piercing. Lauren blinked, caught off guard. Well, sometimes we have limited quantities. That's interesting, Amara said, glancing toward Davenport, who had just been served the filet. It seems you had enough for others. Lauren's cheeks flushed, and she shifted uncomfortably. I'll see if the kitchen has an extra, she said quickly, turning on her heel and retreating toward the galley. As Amara waited, she glanced out the window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. The sky outside was a deep indigo, the horizon glowing faintly with the remnants of the setting sun. It was a stark contrast to the artificial brightness of the cabin, where microaggressions hid behind polished smiles and polite facades. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice from the row behind her. Excuse me, the woman said hesitantly. Amara turned to see an older lady with kind eyes peering over the seat. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how they're treating you. It's not right. Amara's expression softened slightly. Thank you, she said, her voice genuine. It's nothing I haven't dealt with before. The woman nodded, her face tinged with sadness. Well, just know that not all of us feel the way they do. Amara gave her a small, appreciative smile before turning back to face the front. The woman's kindness was a brief balm, but it didn't erase the sting of the other passengers' behavior, or Lauren's overt disdain. Lauren returned a few minutes later, this time with a plate of filet mignon. She placed it in front of Amara without a word, her movements brisk and mechanical. Thank you, Amara said, her tone even but with a hint of steel. Lauren didn't respond, quickly moving on to the next passenger. Amara watched her retreat, the corners of her mouth tightening. The game they were playing was subtle, but Amara knew the rules and she intended to win. The rest of the meal passed in relative quiet, though Amara could still feel the weight of the other passengers' gazes. She remained composed, eating slowly and deliberately, refusing to let their judgment affect her demeanor. When the plates were cleared and the lights dimmed for the evening, Amara leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. The flight was long, but she had time. Time to observe, time to plan. She knew this wasn't over. As the cabin settled into a hushed stillness, her phone buzzed faintly in her pocket. She pulled it out, her fingers gliding over the screen as she composed a brief message. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile as she hit send. The wheels were already in motion, though none of them knew it yet. By the time the plane landed, they would all learn exactly who she was, and just how much power she held. The cabin lights had dimmed into a soothing twilight, a weak attempt at simulating nightfall. Soft murmurs and the occasional clink of glasses punctuated the silence as the first-class passengers settled into their seats for the long flight ahead. Amara, her movements measured and deliberate, adjusted her blanket, her gaze fixed forward. The atmosphere around her, however, was anything but serene. The faint rustling of papers, the low chuckles from Davenport and his companions, and the pointed avoidance of Lauren's gaze all painted a vivid picture of exclusion. Amara could feel it, sharp and cutting, even in the shadows of the dimmed cabin. It wasn't just the blatant actions, the refusals, or the stares. It was the accumulation of small, calculated dismissals that weighed heavily, like tiny pebbles dropped into a still pond, each ripple overlapping the last. Amara wasn't one to brood, but the incidents gnawed at her. She thought back to Lauren's reluctance, Davenport's arrogance, and the unspoken judgment that permeated the cabin. The experiences weren't new, but that didn't make them less exhausting. Still, she carried herself with poise. She had learned early on that to react emotionally was to give others power, and she wasn't about to let them win. The cabin crew moved methodically through their tasks, their chatter muted but audible. Lauren's voice was unmistakable, carrying an edge that was sharper now, tinged with frustration. Amara caught snippets of a hurried exchange near the galley. "Why does she have to make everything difficult?" Lauren hissed. "She's just sitting there," came a softer, hesitant voice, likely the other attendant, Josh. Maybe we should just let it go." Lauren's response was inaudible, but the disdain in her tone was unmistakable. Amara didn't flinch, though she heard every word. She kept her gaze forward, her hands resting lightly on the armrests, her posture regal even as her mind churned. Time passed slowly. The cabin settled into a lull as most passengers leaned back in their seats, some with blankets pulled tightly around them, others engrossed in movies or books. Amara, however, remained alert, her senses tuned to the undercurrent of unease. Lauren returned, ostensibly to check on the passengers. She moved deliberately down the aisle, her steps slow and calculated. When she reached Amara's row, she paused, glancing down with a thin, insincere smile. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her voice carrying the practiced politeness of someone performing a chore. Amara met her gaze steadily. "Quite fine, thank you," she replied, her tone measured and polite, though the edge of her words left little room for misinterpretation. Lauren lingered for a moment longer than necessary before moving on. Amara didn't watch her leave. Instead, she reached for the small leather notebook tucked into her bag. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting, notes, observations, reminders of things to address when she stepped into her new role as CEO. As the flight progressed, the cabin grew quieter. The air felt heavier, the tension no longer hidden beneath a facade of civility. Amara turned her attention to the window, watching the vast darkness outside. The stars seemed distant and unreachable, scattered like tiny pinpricks of light against the void. Her phone vibrated softly on the tray table. She glanced at the screen, her lips curling into a faint smile as she read the message. The response had come faster than she anticipated, but it didn't surprise her. The person on the other end was efficient, one of the many reasons she had chosen them for the role. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Lauren returned, this time with a tray of water bottles. She moved quickly, almost mechanically, as if eager to finish her task and retreat to the galley. When she reached Amara, she hesitated again, her hand hovering over the tray. "Water?" Lauren asked, her voice clipped. "Yes, please," Amara said calmly. Lauren handed her a bottle, her fingers brushing Amara's lightly as she did. The contact was brief, but it was enough for Amara to notice the tremor in Lauren's hand. It wasn't fear, exactly, but unease, an acknowledgement that the situation was no longer entirely under her control. Amara watched as Lauren hurried away, her steps quick and uneven. The power dynamic was shifting, and Lauren could feel it, even if she didn't yet understand why. The hours dragged on, the flight moving through the night like a shadow slipping across the sky. Amara allowed herself a moment of reflection, her mind sifting through the events of the evening. She thought of the people who had underestimated her, the assumptions they had made, and the small triumphs she had achieved by simply refusing to shrink. The cabin lights dimmed further, signaling that it was time for passengers to rest. Amara reclined her seat, closing her eyes briefly, though sleep didn't come easily. She was too aware of the quiet conversations, the shuffling of feet, and the occasional glances cast her way. As dawn approached, the faint light of the horizon began to seep into the cabin, casting long shadows across the seats. The crew prepared for the breakfast service, their movements quiet and efficient. Lauren avoided Amara's gaze entirely, her demeanor more subdued than before. Amara sipped her coffee slowly, savoring the warmth as she prepared herself for what was to come. The end of the flight was near, and with it, the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when everything would change. She leaned back, her lips curving into a small, enigmatic smile. Patience had always been her greatest strength, and now it was about to pay off. The faint hum of the engines was now accompanied by the soft rustling of movement as passengers stirred from their restless sleep. The cabin, bathed in the muted glow of the rising sun, was slowly coming back to life. Amara sat upright, the golden light filtering through the window casting a subtle sheen on her poised features. She had barely slept but felt no fatigue, only a quiet anticipation that simmered beneath her composed exterior. Lauren passed by her row, her steps deliberate yet cautious. The morning's tasks seemed to weigh heavier on her now, her earlier confidence replaced by a flicker of hesitation. She avoided Amara's gaze entirely, focusing instead on handing out breakfast trays to the other passengers. When she finally reached Amara, the tray was placed on the table with mechanical precision, the sound of porcelain plates clinking faintly in the hushed cabin. "Thank you," Amara said softly, her tone neutral but firm. Lauren offered a tight nod before quickly retreating, her shoulders slightly hunched as if shielding herself from an invisible weight. Amara glanced at her tray, an array of pastries, fresh fruit, and steaming coffee. The presentation was meticulous, yet it felt perfunctory. She sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding her in the moment. The tension in the air was palpable, a quiet storm building around her that only she seemed to notice. Across the aisle, Davenport shifted in his seat, his expression groggy but still imbued with the smugness of a man who believed the world catered to his every whim. He caught sight of Amara and smirked, his gaze lingering a beat too long. "Enjoying your flight?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge of mockery. Amara didn't respond immediately. She set her coffee down carefully, her movements deliberate. When she finally looked at him, her gaze was steady and unyielding. "Quite," she replied, her voice calm but with an undertone that left no room for further commentary. Davenport chuckled, as if dismissing her words as inconsequential. He turned back to his tray, unaware of the storm that was brewing beneath Amara's composed surface. As the flight neared its final hour, the cabin crew began their preparations for landing. Lauren returned, this time with a clipboard in hand, her demeanor strained. She moved through the cabin, confirming details with passengers, her voice tight and formal. When she reached Amara, there was a noticeable pause. Lauren glanced at her clipboard, then at Amara, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Ms. King, is it?" Lauren asked, her voice faltering slightly. "Yes," Amara replied, her tone measured. Lauren hesitated, her pen hovering over the clipboard. "Is there anything else you'll need before we begin our descent?" Amara regarded her for a moment, her gaze unwavering. "Not at the moment," she said, her voice calm but laced with a quiet authority. Lauren nodded quickly, almost nervously, before moving on. Amara watched her retreat, noting the stiffness in her posture and the hurried way she spoke to the next passenger. The power dynamic had shifted further, though Lauren likely didn't fully understand why. The descent was smooth, the sprawling city below coming into view through the windows. The passengers began to stir, gathering their belongings and adjusting their seatbelts. Amara remained seated, her expression serene but focused. Her phone vibrated softly in her lap, and she glanced at the screen, reading the message with a faint smile. Everything was in place. When the plane finally landed, there was a brief flurry of movement as passengers stood to retrieve their luggage from the overhead compartments. Lauren and Josh moved through the cabin, their smiles forced as they bid each passenger goodbye. Amara waited, her movements unhurried as she retrieved her bag from under the seat. At the door, Lauren stood alongside the pilot, her smile strained as she greeted each passenger. When Amara approached, Lauren's demeanor shifted, her composure faltering. "Thank you for flying with us," Lauren said, her voice almost robotic. Amara paused, her gaze locking onto Lauren's. "I'll be seeing you again," she said, her tone calm but carrying a weight that Lauren couldn't quite place. Lauren's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her reaction, stepping aside to allow Amara to exit. The pilot, standing next to Lauren, watched the exchange with a faint frown, as though sensing an undercurrent he couldn't identify. As Amara stepped onto the jet bridge, the crisp morning air greeted her, refreshing and invigorating. She walked with purpose, her heels clicking softly against the floor. A uniformed man stood waiting at the end of the bridge, his posture straight and respectful. "Miss King," he said, inclining his head, "everything is ready." "Thank you," Amara replied, her voice carrying the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do. She followed him through the terminal, the early morning crowd bustling around them. Her stride was steady, her expression serene, but her mind was sharp and focused. The time for patience had passed. Now it was time for action. As they approached the private lounge reserved for executive staff, Amara's steps slowed. She turned to the man beside her, giving him a small nod. "Let's begin," she said, her voice steady but filled with quiet determination. He nodded and opened the door for her, ushering her into the next chapter of the day, one that would shift the narrative entirely. Amara stepped into the private executive lounge, her heels sinking softly into the plush carpet. The room was spacious yet intimate, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline. A warm golden hue bathed the room as the morning sun poured in, casting long, deliberate shadows across the polished oak table at its center. The quiet hum of the airport was muted here, creating a sanctuary of calm, a stark contrast to the tension she had endured on the flight. A man in a dark suit stood near the table, his posture immaculate, his expression neutral yet attentive. He was tall, with an air of professionalism that suggested he had been trained to anticipate the needs of people far above his station. His name tag identified him as Michael, Director of Operations. When he saw Amara, he straightened further, his hands clasped neatly in front of him. "Good morning, Miss King," Michael said, his voice low and respectful. "We've prepared everything as per your instructions." Amara offered a small nod, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Michael. Is everyone accounted for?" "Yes, ma'am. The captain, the flight crew, and the cabin staff are waiting in the adjoining conference room," Michael replied. "Shall I escort you?" Amara allowed a moment's pause, letting his words hang in the air. "Not yet," she said finally, her tone measured. "I'd like to review the preliminary reports first." "Of course," Michael said, stepping aside to reveal a sleek leather folder on the table. Amara approached, her movements deliberate, and opened the folder. Inside were detailed accounts of the flight's operations, including timestamps, passenger manifests, and incident logs. But what she was most interested in was the section labeled Crew Notes. Her eyes scanned the pages with precision, absorbing the information without betraying a hint of emotion. The report was thorough, as she had expected. Michael had a reputation for excellence, and he hadn't disappointed. The notes detailed every interaction involving the cabin crew, though they were notably sparse on the subtler tensions. Amara's lips pressed into a thin line as she read Lauren's comments. Passenger in 3. A requested special attention, appeared high maintenance, questioned availability of menu options unnecessarily, demonstrated a confrontational attitude. Amara closed the folder carefully, her expression impassive. She straightened and turned to Michael. "It's clear to me that the training standards we've set are not being met," she said, her voice calm but with a sharp undercurrent. "I'll address this personally." Michael inclined his head. "Understood, ma'am. Shall I bring them in now?" Amara paused again, her gaze drifting toward the windows. The city below seemed alive with motion, its endless rhythm a reminder of the world she was determined to shape. "Yes," she said finally. "Let's begin." Michael moved swiftly to the adjoining room, the sound of the door opening and closing faint in the otherwise silent lounge. Moments later, the cabin crew filed in, their steps hesitant and uneven. Amara remained standing by the table, her posture commanding, her gaze fixed firmly on the group. Lauren was the first to enter, her face carefully neutral but her eyes betraying a flicker of unease. Josh followed, his expression more openly anxious, his hands fidgeting at his sides. Behind them came the captain and 2 additional attendants, their demeanors varying from curious to nervous. "Please have a seat," Amara said, gesturing toward the chairs arranged around the table. Her voice was calm, almost inviting, yet it carried an authority that left no room for hesitation. The crew obeyed, their movements stiff as they settled into their seats. Amara remained standing, her presence towering even without the physical height. She allowed a moment of silence to settle over the room, letting the weight of her gaze fall on each individual. "Before we begin," Amara said finally, her voice smooth and deliberate, "I want to thank you all for your service on this morning's flight. Running an airline is no small task, and I recognize the effort it takes to ensure everything runs smoothly." Her words were measured, but the undertone was unmistakable, a prelude to something far more significant. The crew exchanged glances, their expressions wary. "However," she continued, her tone sharpening ever so slightly, "there are standards of conduct that must be upheld. These standards are not suggestions. They are the foundation of this airline's reputation." Amara turned her gaze to Lauren, who stiffened under the scrutiny. "Miss Dawson," Amara said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade, "would you care to explain the discrepancies in your service today?" Lauren blinked, her composure cracking. "I'm not sure what you mean, ma'am," she said, her voice strained but attempting to sound professional. Amara raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a faint, unreadable smile. "Then allow me to clarify," she said. "You were observed displaying selective attention to passengers in first class. You ignored requests, made inappropriate comments, and demonstrated behavior unbecoming of a senior flight attendant." Lauren's face flushed, her hands clenching in her lap. "With all due respect, Miss King, I wasn't aware you were observing the crew so closely." "Of course you weren't," Amara replied smoothly, "because you didn't know who I was." The room fell silent, the weight of Amara's words sinking in like stones into still water. Lauren's eyes widened, the realization dawning slowly. Josh shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at Lauren as if seeking guidance. Amara stepped closer to the table, her gaze sweeping over the group. "My name is Amara King," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "As of last month, I am the new CEO of this airline." The collective reaction was immediate. A mixture of shock, embarrassment, and unease rippled through the room. Lauren's mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. The captain sat straighter in his chair, his expression shifting to one of cautious respect. Amara allowed the silence to stretch, her gaze holding Lauren's. "You didn't just fail to uphold our standards," she continued, her voice unwavering. "You demonstrated a lack of integrity and professionalism that reflects poorly on this airline." Lauren stammered, her confidence shattered. "Miss King, I didn't mean—" "I'm not interested in excuses," Amara said, her tone firm but controlled. "What I am interested in is accountability." She turned to Michael, who stood quietly by the door. "Ensure that Miss Dawson and Mr. Spencer are placed on immediate suspension," Amara said. "They will undergo retraining and an internal review before they are allowed to return to service." Michael nodded, his movements brisk as he made a note on his clipboard. Amara returned her gaze to the crew, her expression softening slightly. "This is not just about punishment," she said. "It's about ensuring that every passenger, regardless of their background, feels valued and respected. That is the culture we will build." The room remained silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Amara straightened, her posture exuding confidence and authority. She had made her point, and the message was clear. This was no longer the airline they had grown complacent in. Change had arrived, and it wore the face of Amara King. The meeting had ended, the room slowly emptying as the cabin crew filed out with a mixture of embarrassment and quiet resolve. Lauren lingered near the doorway, her movements hesitant, as though waiting for an opportunity to speak. Amara, still standing near the table, exuded a calm authority that seemed to fill the room. She didn't look at Lauren immediately, instead tidying the papers in front of her with deliberate precision. Finally, Amara raised her head, her gaze locking onto Lauren's. "Was there something else you needed, Miss Dawson?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with finality. Lauren swallowed hard, her hands wringing in front of her. "Miss King, I wanted to apologize," she began, her voice faltering. I didn't realize who you were, and if I'd known— Amara held up a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. Stop, she said, her tone soft but firm. This isn't about who I am, Miss Dawson. It's about what you assumed based on who you thought I wasn't. The words hung in the air like a sharp rebuke, their weight unmistakable. Lauren's face flushed deeply, and she dropped her gaze to the floor. Amara watched her for a moment longer, then sighed, a hint of weariness creeping into her voice. Apologies are only meaningful when accompanied by change, Amara continued. I'm giving you the opportunity to reflect on your actions and decide what kind of person you want to be moving forward. Don't waste it. Lauren nodded stiffly, her lips pressing into a thin line. Without another word, she turned and exited the room, her steps quick and uneven. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed softly in the now empty space. Amara exhaled slowly, the quiet of the room settling over her like a heavy blanket. For the first time since the flight began, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day's events. She had expected resistance, anticipated the subtle pushback that often accompanied her presence in spaces where people underestimated her. But the directness of the discrimination had still left its mark, a small but persistent ache that she carried quietly. Michael returned, his clipboard tucked under one arm. He approached Amara with a professionalism that was both efficient and unobtrusive, his presence a grounding force in the aftermath of the confrontation. Miss King, he said, his tone even. The board meeting is scheduled for this afternoon. I've also arranged for a press briefing tomorrow morning to address the updates to our customer service policies. Good, Amara replied, her voice firm. She appreciated Michael's ability to stay focused, to keep the larger picture in mind even as smaller fires demanded attention. And the incident report from the flight? I've finalized the draft, Michael said, handing her a slim folder. It includes a summary of passenger feedback, as well as recommendations for addressing gaps in training. Amara accepted the folder, her fingers brushing against the smooth leather cover. She opened it and scanned the contents briefly, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed the details. Michael had been thorough as always, but the report confirmed what she already knew. Systemic change was necessary. The room's quiet began to feel stifling, the weight of decisions and responsibilities pressing heavily on Amara's shoulders. She closed the folder and placed it on the table, turning to face the window. The city below stretched endlessly, a sea of movement and possibility. It's exhausting sometimes, Amara said quietly, her voice softer now. Being the one who has to prove over and over again that we belong, that we're more than what they assume. Michael hesitated, his professional mask slipping just slightly as he considered her words. You shouldn't have to, he said finally, his voice low. But the fact that you do, it changes things, for the better. Amara nodded, though her gaze remained fixed on the skyline. I know, she said. That's why I do it. Not just for me, but for everyone who comes after me. The sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the room as the day progressed. Amara turned back to Michael, her expression resolute once more. Make sure the retraining program emphasizes empathy and cultural awareness, she said. This can't just be about ticking boxes. It has to make a real impact. Understood, Michael replied. I'll coordinate with HR to implement the changes immediately. Amara offered a small nod, her lips curving into a faint smile. Thank you, Michael. I know I can count on you. As the hours wore on, Amara found herself drawn into a series of meetings and calls, each one a step toward reshaping the culture of the airline. The work was tedious but necessary, each detail demanding her attention as she navigated the complex web of policies and practices that defined the company's operations. By the time evening fell, she was finally alone in her office, a sleek modern space that overlooked the city. The view was breathtaking, the lights of the skyscrapers twinkling like stars against the dark canvas of the night. Amara sat at her desk, a cup of tea cooling beside her as she reviewed the final drafts of the day's reports. The quiet was soothing, a moment of reprieve after the intensity of the day. Yet even in the stillness, her mind buzzed with plans and possibilities. As she leaned back in her chair, her phone buzzed softly on the desk. She picked it up, her brows furrowing slightly as she read the message. It was a note from a colleague, a quiet acknowledgement of the challenges she had faced today, and a reminder of the progress she was making. Amara smiled faintly, her grip on the phone tightening for a moment before she set it back down. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in hours, she felt the weight on her shoulders lighten just slightly. She wasn't alone in this fight, and that made all the difference. The night stretched on, and Amara continued her work, each decision a step closer to the vision she had for the airline, and for herself. The path wasn't easy, but it was hers to walk, and she intended to leave a trail that others could follow. The following morning, Amara arrived at the airline's headquarters, a modern skyscraper that stood as a symbol of prestige and efficiency. The day's agenda was packed, but one event held particular weight: the all-staff briefing. It was more than a meeting. It was the moment she had been preparing for, the opportunity to set the tone for the company's future. As she stepped into the executive conference room, the space was abuzz with quiet conversation. Senior executives, department heads, and key stakeholders filled the sleek chairs arranged around the polished oak table. On the large screen at the front of the room, the company's logo gleamed brightly, a reminder of the reputation they were tasked with upholding. The room fell silent as Amara entered, her presence commanding attention. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit, her demeanor composed but resolute. She moved to the head of the table, placing her notes down with deliberate precision before addressing the room. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm yet firm. "As many of you know, yesterday's events brought to light some troubling realities about the culture within our airline. Realities that cannot and will not be ignored." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, the tension palpable. Amara's gaze swept over the room, her tone sharpening. "What I experienced on that flight was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deeper issue, one that undermines the values we claim to stand for. If we are to maintain the trust of our passengers and the integrity of our brand, we must do better." She clicked a small remote, and the screen behind her shifted to display the phrase, "Empathy, excellence, equity." "These three principles will guide every decision we make moving forward," Amara continued. "Empathy, understanding the diverse experiences of our passengers and staff. Excellence, delivering service that reflects the highest standards of professionalism. And equity, ensuring that every individual is treated with dignity and respect." She outlined her plans with precision, detailing the comprehensive retraining program for all employees, new accountability measures for misconduct, and an overhaul of the company's diversity and inclusion policies. The presentation was met with a mixture of quiet agreement and palpable unease, but Amara's confidence left no room for doubt. After the meeting concluded, Amara retreated to her office. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across her desk. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Michael, his expression unreadable as he stepped inside. "Miss King," he began, "Lauren Dawson is here to see you. She's requested a private meeting." Amara's brow lifted slightly in surprise. She hadn't expected Lauren to reach out so soon, if at all. After a brief pause, she nodded. "Send her in." Lauren entered the office hesitantly, her posture rigid and her eyes wary. She was dressed in her uniform, though it looked less pristine than before, as if the confidence she once wore had frayed along with its edges. Amara gestured for her to sit, and Lauren obeyed, perching on the edge of the chair like a student called to the principal's office. "Miss Dawson," Amara began, her tone neutral, "what can I do for you?" Lauren hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally, her voice soft, "for how I treated you on the flight, for how I've treated others. Amara leaned back slightly, her gaze steady. "Why now?" she asked, her tone probing but not unkind. Lauren swallowed hard. "Because I see now how wrong I was. Not just about you, but about what it means to do this job. It's not just about following procedures, it's about treating people with respect, no matter who they are." Amara studied her for a long moment, her expression inscrutable. She could see the genuine remorse in Lauren's eyes, but remorse alone wasn't enough. "Words are a start," Amara said finally, "but they're meaningless without action. If you truly want to change, you'll need to show it. Not just to me, but to everyone you encounter in this role." Lauren nodded quickly, her posture straightening. "I will," she said, her voice trembling with conviction. "I'll do whatever it takes." Amara inclined her head slightly, signaling the end of the conversation. "You'll have an opportunity to prove that," she said. "Your suspension stands, but if you complete the retraining program and demonstrate a genuine commitment to our values, you may earn your place here again." Lauren stood, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said softly. "I won't let you down." As Lauren exited the office, Amara turned her gaze back to the window, her reflection superimposed over the cityscape. The road ahead was long, but moments like this reminded her why she fought so hard. For progress, for justice, for change. Weeks turned into months, and the airline began to transform. Amara's reforms sparked a cultural shift, from the boardroom to the cabin crew. Employees underwent rigorous training that emphasized empathy and equity, and new accountability systems ensured that misconduct was swiftly addressed. Lauren completed the retraining program, emerging with a renewed sense of purpose. She became an advocate for inclusivity, her once frayed confidence rebuilt through actions that aligned with the airline's new values. As for Amara, her leadership continued to inspire those around her. She became a symbol of resilience and progress, her story resonating far beyond the walls of the airline. Each challenge she faced only strengthened her resolve, proving that justice wasn't just a goal, it was a journey. And so the airline soared higher than ever, not just in the skies, but in the hearts of the people it served. Amara's vision had taken flight, leaving a legacy that would guide the company for generations to come. And just like that, the tables were turned. What started as an ordinary flight became a powerful lesson in respect and equality. This story isn't just about one woman. It's a reminder that everyone deserves dignity, no matter how they're perceived. If this story inspired you, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you'll never miss stories like this, ones that challenge assumptions and celebrate justice. See you in the next one.